Real power is, I don't even want to use the word fear. Donald Trump. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. I want to jump into the comments here really quickly and just kind of start off on a different foot here and just say good morning to everybody. Time Surfing Alien says, Liberty Lady, DL, good morning. Good morning to you. And also good morning to you, Rumble Seat Pete. So thank you guys and gals for joining the show this morning. That Liberty Lady points out, if you haven't chattered, we're coming up with new words today or these days in social media. If you haven't chatted over the month on Liberty Dad's Rumble, then what are you waiting on? Like, for real, what are you waiting for? I know what I'm waiting for you to chatter. Wah, wah. I need to get that button set up so I can do that. All right. Enough with the corny dad jokes. But yes, Rumble has new requirements for me. So I need to have 20 people chatting in the live stream sometime during this month, 20 unique people. So if you haven't chatted yet, if you haven't, just maybe you don't want to say anything, but just come in and say, hey, DL, how's it going? Like, that'll work. Just give me a hello. Let me know you're here. And I'll say hello back, until such time that we get so many people chatting that I can't keep up with all of you. But for now, go ahead and let me know you're here. Give me a wave. Give me some commentary, some critique, whatever, just say something, anything. That'll be good. Get me past that new threshold, and we'll just keep improving on this show. All right, folks, what do we got today? We've got some Donald Trump. I figured I'd start off, a lot of times I go to social media and I look there for a lot of my content. And so we're skipping that today. We're going to do it a little different. Today, I'm just going to pull up on the screen for you some documents that Donald Trump has been, that is signed. We'll just kind of go through them pretty quickly. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them. Just kind of want to give you a heads up of what's going on. So he's got a couple of them. One's related to Cuba. I don't know if you heard about that or not. And then another related to TikTok. So that is back, excuse me, in the news. So let's take a look and see what we've got going on here. So here it is, his National Security Presidential Memorandum SPM-5. So I assume that's the fifth one. This was signed June 30th. We're going to skip all the way down here. He's just got a list of people in here. We're going to start here on the purpose of it. What is the purpose? The United States recognizes the need for more freedom and democracy, improved respect for human rights, and increased free enterprise in Cuba. Okay. The US can recognize all they want that other countries need to improve, right? Your government needs to be less restrictive. Not, not that our government exactly is in a good position. I mean, maybe compared to them, they are. But from my perspective, our government really doesn't have any business telling other governments like how to behave. But anyway, that's beside the point. So they go on, it says the Cuban people have long suffered under a communist regime that suppresses their legitimate aspirations for freedom and prosperity and fails to respect their essential human dignity. Okay, fair enough. I have no disagreement with that. However, it's not really much that the US can do for the people of Cuba regarding their communist government or any government that they would have. And really, here's the reason why it has to come from the people. I mean, our own government is like out of hand in some ways. And it's a result of our people. And so if we're not going to take care of our own government, you can't really expect some other group of people to take care of your government for you. Now, that's not to say that, governments can't influence other governments, maybe through negotiation or through policies for which I would probably disagree with, embargoes and such. But that's just to say that, like, I think we need to recognize as Americans that it's really the Cuban people that need to rise up and replace their government if they don't like it. Maybe they do like it. I don't know. I'm not Cuban, but I presume that they don't. And all the Cubans that I've talked to kind of indicate that there's not a lot of love there, unless maybe you're one of the people that are in power. So let's take a look at the next highlight here. I will seek to promote a stable and prosperous and free country for the Cuban people. To that end, we must channel funds toward the Cuban people and away from a regime that has failed to meet the most basic requirements of a free and just society. Now, it's not the government's job to funnel money to another country. That just plain and simple. There's no ifs, ands, or buts on that. Not the US government's job to send money to Cuba. End of story. Okay. Um, I mean, the idea is nice, right? I mean, if you think about it, hey, you've got a communist regime. They don't treat you so well, terrible in some respects. And then we're going to make sure that they don't get any money. We'll only give it to entities that are not cooperating with the Cuban government or not directly under their control or whatever, right? It sounds nice. But at the end of the day, you're still sending money from here to there. That's not really yours to send. And then on top of that, you are trying to ensure that only certain people get the money in a country for which you do not have any authority. So at any point, the communist, regime of Cuba could basically do whatever they want. So there's no guarantee there. It's kind of like sending food to a foreign country that's being run by warlords, and then you're like, "Wow, the warlords are taking all the food. They're not giving it to the people." Huh, well, what a surprise, right? But if the food was coming through private entities, that would be one thing. But when it comes to governments, then you get all this additional complexity to it, right? Because they have an incentive to enforce it. Maybe they want to flex their might on the other government. Like it just gets really complex unnecessarily from there. But ultimately, it's not the U.S. Government's job to channel funds. That's not their role. Let's continue on. Let's see what else is in here. And economic practices that disproportionately benefit the Cuban government or its military, intelligence, or security agencies or personnel at the expense at the expense of the Cuban people. So they want to end economic. I don't know what these practices are, but I'm going to go ahead and kind of like say good, I guess. I again, I don't know what they are, so it's hard for me to say, yep, because there could be some practices where I say, yes, we need to end this one. And then others where I might say, well, maybe we don't need to end this one, or maybe we don't need to end this one just yet. Maybe we need to prioritize them, and that would be fine. So I don't know exactly, but off the cuff, I would just say this sounds good because we shouldn't be engaging in economic practices that benefit another government at the expense of the people. So like whatever. Let's see. Then there's end adherence to the statutory ban on tourism in Cuba to Cuba. So here's the thing. It I don't think the US government needs to be placing bans on tourism to other countries. Now, what they can do, because there are countries for which if Americans go to, it could be dangerous for them, right? So you could say, "Hey, we're going to give you a travel advisory, and we're going to like if somebody applies for a visa or they're getting a flight to Cuba, I don't see a problem with the government saying, "Look, there are issues over in Cuba. We cannot protect you, nor are we going to necessarily try." I mean, they always should try, but, you know, kind of give them that upfront warning and say, like, look, you're on your own here. Okay. We love our American citizens, but if you're going to go to a country that we're telling you is not, a good country for Americans, and you do it anyway, like, don't necessarily expect the Navy SEALs to come and rescue you. We'll try to negotiate for your return and all that, but there will be a point where our hands are tied and you made your own decision. So I don't think that the government has any business in putting bans on tourism, just simply making sure that people that want to leave and go there are very aware of what they're walking into and very aware of the limitations that our government has. Like, look, we're not going to start a full scale war to come and get you. Okay. Even though, I mean, we could obviously totally beat up Cuba, but that's not the point. The point is, number one, allowing people to do what they want. And then number two, if what they want to do is a bad idea, like objectively currently a bad idea, then perhaps we just inform them. Like, I'm all about the government providing information. That, to me, that should be one of the most important roles that the federal government has to the American people, is providing as much information as possible in the cleanest and neatest way that they can. That would, like, to me, that would be the best thing they could do for this country, and then we can sort out what we want to do. Let's see here. Now, D, amplify efforts to support the Cuban people through the expansion of internet services, free press, free enterprise, free association, and lawful travel. So, again, this is something that sounds nice. However, like, what does it have to do with our government? And what can they actually do on this? Now, if they just want to engage in conversations and maybe convince their leaders to do certain things, I'm all about that. That's fine. But I don't know what these efforts are, and I don't know how they're planning to support them. So I would have to know more details specifically. So I don't like this. I'm going to oppose it just on the grounds of, like, I don't know what it is. Here's the thing, and I mentioned this last night on social media. When it comes to, like, legislation or the government formally putting into, putting in word what they will or will not do, right? Think of it more in terms of legislation, but anything like an executive order, those kind of things. Um, it's in the absence of information, it's generally better to oppose than to support, because you have a lot of unintended consequences when you support. And so if you're ignorant about something, so like somebody was asking about the big beautiful bill, which I'm not dutifully keeping up with all the changes, and generally I oppose omnibus bills. So, well, not generally, I just do. And then so right there, I'm not a big fan of it, because you got all these different items in this bill, right? And I'm taking a detour here on purpose just to make a point. Um, so somebody asked me, they're like, "Well, what's wrong with it?" I thought they were, working it out. And I said, in my ignorance of keeping up with what is still in there, what is not in there, what changes have been made, when you have something like, that's complex like this, for sure, but even just in general for legislation, I think if you don't have enough information, you're better off opposing it until you get better information. And then, if you have the necessary information, then you can make an educated yes vote. Okay. Because generally, what's happening is you're going from doing something to not doing something, or vice versa, from not doing something to doing something. But whatever position you start in, well, you've already got the evidence of how that works out. What you don't know is how it's going to work out once you introduce a change. So in this particular case, bringing it back to this document here, I don't know what amplify efforts means, and I don't know how they're gonna, how they plan to support the Cuban people. So I would have to know more details. So I oppose it on that ground. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Because what we want to do is we want to be objective, and the reality is, while I am a libertarian and I want tiny, tiny, tiny government, I have to work with what we have, right? And the more information that I have, the more I can either support something and say, okay, maybe this is a good idea for now, even though I might object to it overall, or maybe I just object to it outright, and under no circumstance will I support, right? But we have to have information in order to do that. And we have to know what we're talking about, what we're getting into, what are the potential consequences, good or bad. And without that, I generally will oppose, whether it's an executive order or, again, legislation or what have you. Let's see, last item here. No, not reinstate the wet foot, dry foot policy, which encouraged untold thousands of Cuban nationals to risk their lives to travel unlawfully to the United States. This one's an interesting one because it's actually not entirely true as written. It says it suggests that the policy encouraged so many thousands of Cubans to come to the United States, but actually it did, but actually it was in response to already existing thousands of Cubans coming over here with the support of their government. That was kind of the big deal. It wasn't that just people were fleeing, but even their government was at one point like, "Hey, if you leave and go to the US, we're not going to get in your way." They might have even helped, I'm not sure about that, but they were at least like, "Hey, no punishment if you try to leave." And then of course would you had all these boat full of people coming. That's where we get like things like fresh off the boat and whatever. But you had boatloads of people literally coming to the United States, and they said, "Look, the wet foot, dry foot policy." And I believe it was Clinton who implemented this, and then Obama who actually ended it in 2017. So what you ended up have happening was, um, if you were caught by the U.S. in waters, wet foot, then you would be sent back to Cuba. If you made it to the United States, and I believe like the idea was like even if one foot stepped on dry land, then you would be permitted to stay here and pursue a path to permanent residence, whatever that ends up looking like. And so I I I think that's reasonable if the government wants to implement some sort of policy. I would say, "Hey, if we catch you before you get here, we're sending you back. But if you get here, provided you're not a criminal, like now, if you're a criminal, all bets are off. Send you right on back. Send you somewhere." Okay, I'm fine with that. You know, and I do mean violent criminal. I mean if like we find out that you know stole somebody's wallet or something. Like that's a crime, don't get me wrong. Um, but I'm looking for violent crimes, serious crimes. That those are the ones because I want the resources that we have. We have a limited number of resources. I want them to focus on the most important things. The most important things in my mind are violence, right? Straight out violence, major theft. You steal a car, you know, you embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from a company, something like that. Like those kind of major issues. But if it's small time, it's not to say that it's not a crime. It is a crime. But I think, sometimes you can, I don't want to say excuse it, but you can say, all right, perhaps, in absence of anything worse, this was effectively a one off. And it gets all dicey and we could hammer out details and, argue for hours about the specifics of it. But the gist is for me, I look at it and I say, I want to focus on removing violent criminals, people that commit major property crimes. Those people you can be sent right on back, even if you've made it to the US, right? If we catch you. And I'll talk more about that here in a few moments. But this is kind of like my overview. So I think this was a memorandum, I think. Yeah, I think it's a memorandum. So this is a presidential memoranda. Um, I've got mixed feelings on it. That's where I am. So, and that's how it should be, right? You should sometimes look at something and say, okay, maybe I object to this in whole, or maybe I support it in full, right? And then you might look at something else and they go, I'm kind of on the fence. There are some things that I like about this, some things I don't like about this. So, the next one. This is the TikTok. Remember TikTok? We were all flipping out like, "Oh my god, national security, the Chinese, they want all of our information." Like TikTok when it first came around, what I noticed was TikTok would be all these videos of people being funny, and other my friends were like, "Dude, you got a TikTok?" And I'm like, "No, why would I?" Everybody's like funny on there and interesting, and I'm not funny. I mean, hopefully I'm interesting, but I'm not funny. So like I was like, "No, no way." But anyway, let's talk about this one. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. Basically, what this does is enforces a delay from his prior executive order, so extends it basically. So in January, and you can see it here. And maybe I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. There we go. So his executive order 14166 on January 20th, that one had a delay in enforcing this PAFACA, Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. And basically, this was, oh my God, national security. The Chinese are going to try to scoop up our info. So therefore, we're going to pass this legislation that requires TikTok to be sold to somebody who is effectively not under the authority of uh, the CCP. Right now, it's owned by ByteDance, who is under the authority of the CCP. Now, if I remember, there was no evidence that they were necessarily working with or giving our information up, but they probably were. Anyway, so this he had this executive order that basically said, okay, we're not going to enforce this legislation, and then now he's extending it. Okay. So during this period, the Department of Justice shall take no action to enforce the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. Okay. Or impose any penalties against any entity for any noncompliance with the act, including for distributing, maintaining, or updating or enabling the distribution, maintenance, or updating of any foreign adversary controlled applications as defined in the act. So it's basically saying, hey, look, Department of Justice, sit, do nothing. As far as I know, that seems legal. That's under his purview. He can go and tell them, you stand down, do nothing. I don't know that's a good idea. If Congress passes legislation, then, I guess we could take that up with the judicial and say, hey, you're not doing your job. But for me, I opposed the act in the first place. So I don't really have a huge objection with the president, delaying enforcement or prohibiting enforcement. That's fine. And I actually would support that even on a local level. Like you have a local sheriff that might say, hey, we're not doing this. Right. So, so if you oppose, actually, that makes for a good point. If you oppose the idea that, I'm trying to think of that. How do we want to say this? So in this particular case, you have the legislative branch, which says, okay, well, we've passed this law, but the executive branch says, yeah, we're not going to enforce that one. We don't really care. So if you believe this is an acceptable use of his power, then you should also believe that states and cities can be a sanctuary state or city. Yeah, I said that. I'm going to challenge you today. And the reason is federal law does not require states or cities to enforce or participate in federal programs or federal enforcement, right? They don't but they do have rules that say states and cities cannot impede their efforts, right? So there's a difference. Like you don't have to work with us, but you cannot get in our way. And so states like Colorado and California, when they go and they say, hey, we're a sanctuary state, or a city says we're a sanctuary city, ultimately what they're doing is they're just saying formally in, legally, our city government or our state government, including law enforcement, are not permitted, they're prohibited from working with the like ICE or other federal agencies. So, if if you support Florida, which has explicitly passed legislation saying, "Hey, you can Not only you can, but you are expected to. So in Florida, law enforcement agencies are required by law to work with federal law enforcement agencies when it comes to deportation and other immigration things. In Colorado and California, they have legislation that says no, you cannot. And so I'm making a connection here because these are different, these are different parts of the government and separation of powers. So the separation of powers between judicial, federal, and executive branches also exist between federal, state, and then even local governments as well. So it really is a matter of you being consistent in your view of separation of powers. That's really so. If you support any one of those, you should support all of those, right? Like, that's just how it works. So I don't take any big issue here with him directing the Department of Justice to not take any actions. Then we go on. I think there's another one here. Yeah. Because of the national security interest at stake and because Section 2D of the Act vests authority for investigations and enforcement of the Act only in the Attorney General, attempted enforcement by the states or private parties represents an encroachment on the powers of the executive. I'm a little on the fence on this one. And it's more because when I went and I read Section 2D, I don't read it as, okay, we're Congress, we're passing this legislation, and we're saying that this can only be um, investigated and enforced by the Attorney General or at their discretion. What they said was they directed the Attorney General to do certain things. So there's a distinction. It's one thing if I say, let's say I making a rule for the house, and I say, okay, this is mommy's job. Okay, mommy, I want you to do this every day. That doesn't necessarily say that my son can't do it. But if I go, this is only for mommy, then that would mean my wife would be the only one that is supposed to do something. And that's what we've got here. So he's exerting or he's expressing in this particular executive order that, hey, this authority for investigations and enforcement is only in the attorney general's hands. That's not how I read the legislation. I read the legislation as just directing the attorney general to do certain things, but not explicitly saying this authority only rests with you, your office, and under your control. So there's a distinction there. It's kind of a legal distinction. So I'm not, and for me, I look at it and I say, the federal government, they they have their powers, and then the states have their powers. Um, I like things to be explicit. And when it's not explicit, then I say, well, then that means somebody else can do whatever. It's kind of like it's generally understood that if government doesn't outlaw something, then it's legal, right? Like this principle of, okay, you didn't say no, so I can do it. And in this particular case, I would go, well, you didn't explicitly say this authority only rests with the attorney general. So therefore, other entities can enforce it if they so choose, which means a state could say, hey, according to the law, again, which by the way, I disagree with, but according to the law, we're going to follow this particular law because we don't believe that the executive branch at the federal level is doing what they're supposed to be doing. So Congress has passed a law. The executive branch is sitting on their hands. They're not doing anything. We as a state say we actually support that law. So therefore, we are going to enforce it in some way. Now, it sounds kind of messy and dirty, and it is, but I prefer messy and dirty if it means we're having many checks and balances in our government. And I think one of the checks and balances is, okay, if Congress passes a law that deals at the federal level, and then the executive branch isn't, is just kind of like sitting around like, yeah, we don't feel like working. We don't feel like doing that. Then the states can exert their power and say, okay, well, we're going to, because Congress passed this law and this law would apply within all the states, we're going to respect that law. And if you're not going to do your job, then we will. Again, unless it was explicitly stated that it was only that this investigation and powers to enforce were only vested in the attorney general. So hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a bit complicated for 8 a.m. in the morning, but that's how we do things around here. We dive in and we take a look at it. And we say, all right, what makes sense? What doesn't make sense? And the idea here is for me, and I talked about this in a previous episode, the separation of powers is vitally important to our system of government. It was literally designed around that idea. And in separation of powers is consistent throughout our government, not only at the federal level, but at the state level and also at the local level. And so that's how you keep your government in line is by having other government. I mean, number one, by having the people call and scream and yell and whatever at their representatives, but then also by having different parts of government that can push back upon itself, so that you don't have this full on single entity that's moving in the same direction, because that would be bad. So we want a somewhat divided government where the government has to figure out things and has to work things out. It sounds counterintuitive, but that's how you maintain your freedom. That's how, and I referred to this before, when Benjamin Franklin came out of the Constitutional Convention and he was asked, "What, sir, have you given us?" He said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Right? The idea being, hey, we've given you this great thing. You, the people, have to manage it. You have to make sure that the separation of powers is constantly being used. You have to make sure all these different things. And if you're not, then your government is going to get away from you. So. All right, let's take a quick intermission. But first, let's head on over to the live chat, and we'll see what y'all folks are saying. Let's see here. I see do. I don't see anything on my. Oh, we need our music. We need our cool music here. So I don't see anything over on Twitter or on Facebook. So let's check out what's going on from YouTube and Rumble. All right, do. Hmm. Oh yes, bet a bunch of GOP podcasters will be talking about Massey today. I stand grandly with Massey. Yes, I could have talked about that, but I did need to get my 47 weekly. But basically, Massey has enough votes to kill the BBB, the big beautiful bill. I support him 100%, and I posted last night. I think it was Charlie Kirk. He was like, "Here's all these things that are these good." He points out all the good things. He's like, here's all these good things that come from the big, beautiful bill, which I would disagree on some of those. And so I was like, there's 23 of them. Sounds like 23 individual bills to me. And then we can hold our Congress accountable. By the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but these omnibus bills where you kind of like put everything together, that really started in like the 1980s, 1990s, somewhere around there. So before that, it didn't really happen very often. Like you could go back in history and you could find where, a few instances where they did kind of compile a bunch of different things together, but generally it was single issue bills. So don't know if you know that, and that it really started becoming more popular in like the 80s. So that's kind of interesting. Let's see here. Do. Um, didn't you get the memo? Americans are incapable of making their own decisions. Time serving alien. Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're not very good at making their own decisions. In a cheeky way, like poking fun at them, like you guys don't even want to make your own decisions. But then also from a government perspective, where the government's like, well, we need to make decisions for the people. They really don't, and people are capable. Even if they're acting as if they're incapable, but they do act incapable. So they kind of make it difficult for us to push back on government because they're not doing it. And the government's like, well, we got to do it. Like, no, you don't. Just let people suffer. It sounds rough, but they'll get the picture. You suffer once or twice and you'll be like, you know what? Maybe I should get my act together. That's the dad in me talking. Like, oh, you don't like that result? Maybe you should have done something different, huh? I'm going to tell that to the American people. Let's see. So my idea of airdropping a couple million handguns, ammo, and easy to read instruction manuals might not work. I'm not sure what you mean there, Kagela. Like dropping them where? Wait a minute. You're giving out free guns? I want one. Guns, ammo. And I mean, I don't really need the instruction manuals. They're all over the internet. I can go find them. But I'll take, if you're giving out free guns and ammo right here, this guy, I'll take some. Let's see here. Yes. What do libertarians say? No victim, no crime. Yes. I am a firm believer. And if there is no victim, then there is no crime. And the government cannot be a victim. So, people can be victims. All right, folks, let's head on to an intermission. Then we'll be back and we'll discuss Alligator Alcatraz. Let's see, where do we go? Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. Hey, we are back. Had the mute button on there. So, I'm gonna have to update that clip there. It's a little bit outdated, but that's okay. We'll take care of it. All right, so Alligator Alcatraz. It's making lots of news now. There's Trump came down to Alligator Alcatraz, met up with Ron DeSantis, and so I've got several clips. Some of them are more specifically they're more generic, and then several of them are specifically either about Alligator Alcatraz or while they were doing the press conference there specifically. Now, I want to start with by saying I prefer finding and deporting violent criminals, as I talked about a moment ago, and then offering a defined but rigid path to residency and potentially citizenship for everybody else. So basically, illegal immigrants. And that doesn't tend to be very popular, but hear me out. Okay. So again, property damage or violence, deported. You're gone. Amnesty for all others. It's the A word. Nobody likes to say that. Okay. But I've got provisions. If one, you can become a legal resident. That doesn't necessarily mean you automatically get citizenship. That just means you're no longer illegal. But I expect you to have no crimes for the next 10 years. You commit a crime because you came here illegally, which means, we might not have good record of you. You didn't go through a port of entry where maybe they could research your name or any of that stuff and turn you away. You're already here. You've potentially already made a life. Okay, fine. So no crimes for the next 10 years for you. Okay. If you commit a crime, or a past crime was discovered, then you get deported. Again, this goes back to what I require for a crime. So like violence, property crimes, major property. So if you're out in a protest, which I'm okay with, but then you start destroying, you burn somebody's car, you're gone. Get out. Okay. You ruined your welcome. Also, while you're here, you get no welfare or social security. Okay. Now, I think maybe we could, if we want to be nitpicky on Social Security, okay, well, if you end up paying for it, I think you have to pay like 5 years into it and then you're eligible to receive it. Okay, fine, I suppose, if somebody wanted to say, okay, well, maybe they just followed the standard Social Security path. But until that time, you don't get any and you don't get welfare. Like you have to figure it out. You have to find a job. And if you can't find a job, like, you can't go to the welfare office and get free money from us because you're not a citizen. Like, for starters, I oppose welfare in the first place. But I think if we're going to have welfare, it should go to American citizens, right? Which I know kind of disrupts, like, hey, wait a minute, but doesn't that money come from taxes and don't immigrants pay taxes? Yes. But we are talking about people that we've given amnesty to. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to work out the people that aren't going to be here on good faith and make America a good place to be, right? We don't want people coming over here and then just being our poor, our homeless. That's not what we want. So what I look at, I say, you're going to have to figure it out. The best way to help them figure it out is one, bring them to light. So that for me, that just kind of like it does fit with my overall view of immigration, but I think it also makes sense. Like, hey, you've been here 10 years, you're an illegal immigrant, and the only thing that you've done wrong is that you came here without getting permission. Well, you've otherwise been the exact kind of person that we want, unless you've been committing crimes or you've been sitting on welfare or you stole somebody's, you got a fake social security number and you've been, defrauding the government, which is really the people out of, social security payments. Okay, well, then that's problematic. But otherwise, all the same legal benefits of any other legal resident. Right. So that's what I would want. Okay. But I don't get what I want. So I've got to judge in the context of where America currently is. So any commentary that I give you, I'll try to distinguish between this is my preferred or okay, I'm just talking about in the context of the US, what makes sense with the laws that we have, and what makes sense to make America or to keep America being great. Okay, I'm not really a MAGA person, although I do believe that America is a great place. And I think that we have to ask ourselves hard questions sometimes. And you know, the whole point about America being great is that you can come here and you can enjoy free market capital, free-ish market, free market-ish capitalism, and then make something of yourself where maybe you didn't have that opportunity elsewhere. All right, so let's look at this first video. So I just wanted to kind of lay that foundation a little bit and just kind of reiterate that, you know, if my judgment was solely on what I envision, then I would basically just say bad idea, bad idea, bad idea, right? Because they're not the idea that I want. But I have to talk about things, I have to at least try to make heads or tails of what it is right now and what we have to work with. All right, so let's go. Let's take a look at this first video here. Let's see here. There you are.
Bureau to redo the census to actually get an account of how many Americans with proof of citizenship are in our area, in our country, redistricting some of the House districts. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll speak for both of us.
Okay, so he's asked about redoing the census, and we've been hearing about this. Like, hey, you've got all these illegal immigrants, and they were counted in the census, and so they adjusted, their representation numbers. And so now there's a concern like, hey, maybe in blue cities they got more representatives and districts. I mean, and then red districts, states, if you will, they got fewer, right? Because supposedly Biden was, bringing in 20 million people and then scattering them about. So that's the argument that's being had. And so he's asked about, okay, well, what about the census? If you remove all these people, then our census is misaligned.
Okay, you're going to like this one. I know all about it. We want to bring our elections back. The election in 2020 was rigged, millions and millions of votes. It had to do with COVID and a lot of things, but it really...
Okay, he just kind of tells you right there. He's like, it had to do with COVID and a lot of things. Okay, so if it's COVID and a lot of things, and I'm not making the argument, we're just kind of going on face value what he said. If 2020 election was rigged and it was related to COVID and it was related to other things, then you can't simply just say we're deporting people and therefore we need to redo the census, because you're kind of in a way cherry picking things, right? Because again, things had multiple causes or multiple reasons for which you saw actions.
Really had to do with the crooked people. The Democrats are very good at cheating on elections. And that's why I said too big to rig. They tried this one too. But after about 9:02, they gave up too many votes. Too big to rig. Ron would...
Too big to rig. That's just so funny.
Love it. I would love it. Christie would love it. That's what they have to do. They have to bring it back. And we have to look, Ron, they include anybody that happens to be in your state.
Well, California would lose like 5 seats if they did a fair census. And even beyond that, the Biden census gypped Florida of at least 1 seat. We only got 1 seat in the last census. Are you trying to tell me that Florida only had 1 seat in that? We should have had at least 2. Texas should have had another one. That could be.
So what's interesting is they're simultaneously complaining that California got like 5 seats because of counting illegal immigrants. And he's like, but they gypped Florida because Florida should have got 1. Texas should have got 1 or 2. Based on what? The same rationale that California got 5? Like, if, you can't, like, I would argue, and we'd have to see the details of the numbers that they're talking about, but I would argue that whatever forces went into contributing to California's number also went into contributing to Florida and Texas's number. Also, keep in mind that we've had people exiting, like, say, New York and even California and coming to Florida. And I think Florida was one of the number one. It was either number 1 or number 2, but in people moving, in the U.S. from one state to another. Like, we've received the most people that were moving. And so, okay, like, I feel like what's going on is they're kind of cherry picking and saying, we don't like this one thing that was part of a broader complexity in what went into the census numbers. So we're going to remove these, and then we're going to redo them because we're totally wanting to get more numbers for us and fewer numbers for the Democrats. For me, I look and I say, what's done is done. Like, unless you're undoing everything that happened, what's done is done. And they're not undoing everything. Okay, they're undoing some things that are politically convenient for them, but they're not undoing everything. And I'm not a big fan of trying to rehash the past. Okay, if you had the 2020 election, you lost it, then you came back and you won it. Okay, and it's kind of weird to make the argument that, okay, well, I lost the election because it was so unfair and rigged. I want you to think about this. Trump was president. He won the election in 2016. He was in office. He was the one in power. And then he lost his next election, supposedly because the government and the Democrats were cheating and then Biden came along, right? He's elected. And then somehow Trump wins in 2024, despite the fact that in the last election they cheated and they won the White House. So for the next 4 years. So to me, it really doesn't add up, and maybe they could work it out and they could lay out their case. But ultimately, I would just say, move on. Move on. It is what it is. Clearly, the census didn't stop you from winning the election. And, he won, if you look at the popular vote, kind of squeaked it out a little bit, but he won sufficiently with the electoral vote. And so for me, I say, you know what? You seem to be able to accomplish things despite the census. Move forward. And if you're removing people and your plan is to implement systems that will remove many of the supposedly 20 million, 15, 20 million people that came through or came into the U.S. through the Biden or under the Biden administration, if that's your plan, then the next census should be fine if you execute it correctly. So I don't see a value add in going back. Let's see what else I say.
The difference in the House of Representatives and the majority. So I would love for them to redo the census for 26. My legislature will redistrict those lines. We'll get it to where it's fair. But as it's right now, this country is not fairly apportioned.
Okay. So whether it's fairly apportioned or not is really a matter of disagreement. And we could go back and forth. But at the end of the day, for one, I'm kind of sensitive to the idea of redistricting because we had that happen here in Jacksonville. We had 3 candidates running for office. Our city council was trying to redistrict things, and they ended up they finally got to a new map, that was accepted after it went to court. But here's the problem. When they redistricted the lines, one of our candidates, an area where he had been really working and going door to door, meeting people, telling them who he was, he got he got redrawn out. And so like that actually ended up that area where he put a lot of work into ended up going to somebody else. So they all those people that said, "Yeah, we're going to vote for you because you're the first person that's come to our door to even talk to us." Well, now they don't even get to vote for him. Right? So I'm kind of sensitive to that. Now, I don't think they did that to necessarily because they were already arguing about the district lines in the first place. So I don't think it really had anything to do with keeping our guy from winning so much as it was, the Democrats and the Republicans were basically fighting for their control. So, but I'm a bit sensitive when it comes to redrawing because at the end of the day, whoever's in power, they redraw it to benefit them. So I don't, they can say all they want. It's more fair, but it's weird how more fair also somehow ends up being, hey, look at that. We got more, right? We got more influence, you know, like, wow, that's convenient how that works. How fairness always ends up being, your advantage. Nobody's like, well, we drew them more fairly and it's going to be tough next election because turns out more fairly was the other team. That never happens. So for me, I oppose it. What else has he got? Because they actually had, so when Trump came down here to Alligator Alcatraz is a little alliteration there. Um, Alligator Alcatraz alliteration. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Um, when he came down, there was actually several things that I found that he said. So here's another one. This was about immigration judges.
This is we're offering up our National Guard and other folks in Florida to be deputized to be immigration judges. We're working with the Department of Justice for the approvals. I'm sure Pam will approve. But then I'll have a National Guard judge advocate here. Someone has a notice to appear. Biden would tell them to come back in 3 years and appear. Now you'll be able to appear in like a day or two. So they're not going to be detained, hopefully, for all that long. We'll have people here in this facility that can make, it's a bureaucracy. The president's got to deal with the bureaucracy. Now, that Supreme Court ruling was good because that's going to allow him to be able to exercise Article 2 the way founders intended. But you still have bureaucracy. So we want to cut through that so that we have an efficient operation between Florida and DHS to get the removal of these illegals done.
Okay. So again, I'm not a big fan of removing people, but I do believe that, and I expressed this on a prior podcast where I said, hey, look, part of the problem that we have is the asylum process. You have a lot of people that have no idea how they should legally come to the US, right? Like, and I don't mean like, hey, go through the port of entry. I mean, like when they're looking online and they're like, what am I eligible for? Most people have no idea. And so they just kind of default to the asylum process. That's why our asylum process is overburdened. We have too few judges. And so he's correct. Somebody will get a quarter date and they'll say, okay, well, you come back in 3 years and we'll determine whether or not you're eligible to be an asylee, to have asylum status. And so then they're 3 years here in the US. That was the reason why we had like the, what was that? The Remain in Mexico Act. That was to say, okay, well, if you come here and you're waiting on asylum, you have to wait at this camp in Mexico. That actually was not a good idea, in my opinion. I talked about that on a prior episode. I don't remember which one at this moment. But ultimately, dealing with this bottleneck in the asylum process, where it's basically they don't have enough judges. Now, it depends on who he's getting appointed as judges. If these are National Guard members who are in the legal system and they understand the law, then I would say, okay, maybe that's not such a bad idea. If it's just a regular Joe, like when I was in the National Guard, I had 4 different jobs over time, but my last job was 11 Bravo. I was infantry. There would have been no reasonable cause for saying, all right, DL, you're in the infantry. You know how to breach concertina wire and you know how to attack an enemy. Okay, great. Why don't you come here and be a judge for the asylum process? That would be absurd and that wouldn't make any sense. But if I was already, had a legal job in the National Guard or the Army, then it might make sense to say, okay, since you understand law in the first place and you're dealing with law, you know how to read the law, you know how to interpret it, so on and so forth, then it would make more sense to say, let's have you do this, fulfill in this civilian capacity, right? And I think that would be in a reasonable usage. And I think it's reasonable for the state to put this together and then work with the federal government. However, I do have some problems with that as well. But I think just in general, just conceptually speaking, if we're talking about, okay, how do we deal with 20 million people that supposedly came here that are not supposed to be here? And we already have a system that's unprepared, that's insufficient to deal with the numbers that have come over. Okay, well, creating that system and dealing with that bottleneck seems to me to be an appropriate course of action. But here's the first objection that I have. This comes from, so they're all sitting at a table, and then you have Representative Byron Donalds, who is the U.S. House Representative for Florida's 19th district. So here's some of his commentary. Check this out.
First of all, Mr. President, we all have to thank you for your leadership and for the mandate that the American people gave you to finally secure our borders and to deport criminal illegal aliens and longstanding illegal aliens out of the United States. That is a mandate given to you by the American people. I know Secretary Noem.
Okay, so I'm not really big on this whole mandate because the president, again, fits within he's part of the executive branch, and our government again is designed with checks and balances. Therefore, like this idea, like, oh, the people voted for this one guy, therefore he has this mandate. No, he has a mandate to try and accomplish things, but he has to work with all the other representatives that people also voted for. And their job is to respond to their constituents. So people like, say, Thomas Massey, who frequently votes no on bills, and he does so with the approval of his constituents and other people who are not his direct constituents. So people like me. Okay. So I don't believe in this mandate per se, as if like, oh, you're obstructing the will of the people. Kind of, sort of. Like, number one, we all know the president runs on things that he can't even necessarily accomplish. Every one of them do. They all make promises. Some of them they can totally do. Some of them they can only do if they can get the cooperation of Congress. And some of them they just can't do it in the first place. Right. So his job is to work with Congress and to make some of these things happen. And the Congress, their job is to do the will of the people. And sometimes a district might say, in our district, we actually oppose this. So the real question here is, what do the people in District 19 support? Do they support this mandate? And do this quote unquote mandate, and do they support it in the way that the president is trying to accomplish it? It's two different things. All right, let's continue.
Stephen Miller, Governor DeSantis, myself, on behalf of the other members of Congress in the Senate, and of course here in Florida, we are behind you 100% in that mission. To the governor, I really appreciate you and commend you for your leadership on this, taking swift, decisive action to building this facility. One of the things that has occurred because of the work you did earlier this year with the legislature is that our sheriffs are out there every single day. They are arresting these criminal aliens in our streets, and they're seeing some backlog in their jails. So this facility primarily goes to address some of that backlog and then to help us fulfill the mission that the president has led us to. So, Governor.
Okay, so I know this is kind of dry and boring, but I'm playing it to give you a little bit of background here. So, number one, he's called out and said, hey, you have a mandate from the people. Okay. And then now he's like, look, in our state, we have sheriffs that are working with federal law enforcement, and their jails are getting pretty full. So he's kind of laying the groundwork like, we need this facility. Okay. So I want you to listen to what comes up here in just a moment.
Thank you for your leadership and thank you for your decisive action on this. It really does mean a lot to all the people of Florida, of course, the people of the 19th Congressional District. Secretary Noem, what can I say? The president's right. You're double tough. So we appreciate all your leadership. You and Tom Homan have been doing
I watched this whole thing, and by the way, there was a lot of, you're so great and awesome. They were promiscuous with the praise for sure, but what it is what it is.
A great job. And I'm actually going back to D.C. after this.
Here we go.
Have to vote on one big, beautiful bill in the House. We have to get that to the president's desk so we can get you the resources that you need to fulfill the mission that the American people have asked us to do. I totally agree with what Mr. Guthrie has said. This is a logistical marvel when something like this occurs. We've seen Florida Department of Emergency Management answer the bell time and time again. The governor has said we need to accomplish this, and DEM gets that job done. And we had a side conversation about, I know there were some concerns. People were like, well, what happens if a hurricane comes? What happens if this happens? And I looked at Kevin Guthrie and I said, you already have a plan, don't you? And he goes, of course we have a plan. You know that we do. This is what Florida does, Mr. President. And so I want to commend you for your leadership and your vision on this. Governor, thank you for all that you've done with your vision and determination. Secretary Noem, we're going to get the bill done so you get the resources you need.
Okay. So the resources that she needs is twofold there. And I think it's like $150 billion. Number one, part of those resources will go to the DHS and for their role and what they need to do, right? And you could say, hey, like, I oppose them getting any money, and that's cool. I will agree with you. We should abolish the DHS. However, again, we are talking about in the context of, okay, what do we have to work with? What's existing? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense is to build an entire facility, go on a dog and pony show tour, talking it up, showing videos, and then having me sitting down or me listening and hearing, now we're going to go and sign this big, beautiful bill to get you the money that you need. And some of that money goes to DHS, but some of it also is to go for the functioning of this new facility. So this facility was built without having funding secured for it. We should always object to that, right? Because then what ends up happening is you've built this thing and government's not so good about saying, well, we probably shouldn't have built it, so we'll tear it down and we're going to apologize to the American people or the citizens of Florida in this case, for spending their money and building something without having secured funding. Now, the other thing is, you can argue about whether or not they should get any funding. In this particular case, since it's dealing with immigration, I guess you could make the argument and say, well, you need some additional funding. It shouldn't be paid for explicitly by the citizens of Florida. You can make that argument. I would make the argument and say, if Florida is dealing with their own, within their own boundaries, then they can pay for it, right? And they can deal with, okay, how do we deal with, how do we balance rounding up people that are not supposed to be here with also dealing with all the regular everyday criminals that Americans can be, right? Because we got people that, commit our own crimes, our own citizens who commit crimes. So for me, this is Republicans not living up to this idea of being fiscally responsible. It is not fiscally responsible to build a facility when you have not secured the funding to manage it. It's just not. End of story. They shouldn't have built it until the big, beautiful bill was passed. Right? If you support the big, beautiful bill and you support Alligator Alcatraz, then you should at least support it being done in a way that ensures that it will actually be successful in doing what it does. Otherwise, we lead ourselves to the same position that we normally are in, which is the government is wasting money. Or to quote Donald Trump, they don't know what the F they're doing. Right? That's basically what it amounts to. I mean, they kind of do. I mean, they're probably building it and then creating a sense of urgency for all the people in Florida and say, hey, you know what? You need to vote yes on the big beauty. So in politically speaking, this might actually make sense. But practically speaking, the American people should be like, whoa, no, absolutely not. I don't care about your political games. What I care is that you are first and foremost fiscally responsible. And it is not fiscally responsible to build an entire facility and prepare to have it in usage before you know that you have the funding to maintain it. Okay? Because what's going to happen if they don't get the funding and they still have to use it? Well, you might have to cut heads, which means now you have maybe, and I'm just making up numbers, maybe they want like a 10-to-1 ratio For every 10 people that come through there, they want one guard or one, staff, or whatever, however you want to call them, right? Well, what if it goes down to 9 to 1? Then that could create a situation where you have people that are outnumbered and you have a potentially dangerous situation. So there are problems with this. And I think the American people should be kind of angry about this. They should be like, whoa, wait a minute. Why did you do this? I don't care that it might be a good idea. I don't care that you might be efficient and effective. I don't care that you might actually be dealing with the bottleneck, the real bottleneck that really does need to be addressed in the asylum process. And I do think we need to address that. I think we need to figure out how do we get more people that are adequate to judge whether or not somebody can be here as an asylum or an asylee. And there are specific requirements. Like if you're just poor, if you come from another country and you're like, yeah, I was poor and there was no economic opportunities for me, that doesn't qualify for being an asylee. You qualify for a different provision in government for that, right? And that's fine. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Just saying like, hey, what are you here for? Oh, you're fleeing persecution. Okay, you can be an asylee, because that's we somewhat treat you differently. If we're going to like deport you or something like that. Like if we end up saying, hey, you can't be here for some reason. And again, I'm talking about in the context of our current laws. So this is just me saying like, look, let's pretend that I agree with the laws as is. Okay, well, let's do it right. That's all I'm asking. Like, let's start there. Do things the correct way. Don't cut corners. It's not okay to cut corners because you got a mandate. It's not okay to cut corners because you're screaming Laken Riley's name. No, for government, it's never acceptable to cut corners. If you want the American people, like it's kind of weird, right? Like to tell people, hey, don't you cut corners coming into this country. But we might cut corners because, we need to deal with it. Like, no, that's not acceptable. All right, let's take a look at Alligator Alcatraz. Got a couple videos here from Benny Johnson, podcaster. So here's what he did a little walkthrough there. He did it in portrait mode. I'm sure there's one in widescreen, so apologies. But you can see all these cages. I'm not a fan. Period. I get it. You need to separate people. They've got bunk beds, and I've seen the comments where people are like, I'm gonna turn that sound down a little bit. I've seen the comments where people are like, wow, these are better than the barracks that I had in the military, or I've stayed in worse. Yes, I have stayed in worse places. For starters, let's be clear. This is brand new. Everything looks nice, brand new. What's it going to look like after 1,000 people have been through it? Like, are they going to have enough staff to keep it clean? Are they going to make sure that it's clean? Are we going to find out that they didn't set it up correctly and people are being assaulted? Women and children are under threat, from, some man who's, maybe because I presume they're going to mix people here. This is going to be a staging area for both the nonviolent and the violent. And so have they made those distinctions? I don't know. But looking at it, it seems to me that they might say, okay, well, women over here, men over here, families over here, something, some sort of distinction like that. But again, it just depends on how it plays out. So it looks nice. Sure. I'll give them credit. It looks nice. I'll give them credit for being able to put it together quickly. Be nice if they could do anything else quickly. You can't even go to the DMV and get your license renewed quickly. Like maybe you should do things quickly for Americans. Figure that out. Cut down on the bureaucracy there. That'd be wonderful. Start but no, they want to cut down the bureaucracy when it comes to illegal immigrants. Okay, well, we'll move them out of here fast, but then you Americans, you just deal with it. You deal with the slowness. All right, we got one more video here. This one kind of displeased me.
I just want everyone to know that there's official Alligator Alcatraz merch. There it is, provided to us by the state of Florida. Incredible. And yeah, would you rock this drip? Look at.
Okay, Benny, I think you're a little old to be saying rock this drip. Just saying.
That.
Also, the answer is no, I would not. Like if I had went there, if I got invited, like, hey, DL, Liberty Dad, come out and give your honest assessment of this. Bring your camera. I would. And if they said, hey, man, here's a cool hat, I would be like, I have my own. I have a couple, actually. I don't need your hat and I don't want your hat because what bothers me the most about this whole immigration conversation is how callous people are acting. Like, okay, let's say that I accept that we're going to remove immigrants here from the United States that whose only crime was coming here without permission. Okay, let's say I accept that. Fine. Perhaps you don't engage in it with glee. Perhaps for the people that support it, you just say, look, here's the law. We want things done the right way. By doing things the right way, we secure a better, society. We like the rule. We like rule and order. Things got to be, sometimes it's a pain, but it's for good reason. Like, at least if you could have that attitude, but there are so many people online. They're excited. They're like, wow, there's merchandise. There should never be any excitement ever for merchandise of a place that looks like an internment camp at a minimum, or might end up being the equivalent of a jail or is a jail. That's just like, that should be unacceptable. We should socially look at that and say, that's not who we are. We do not celebrate these kind of things. Yes, it's kind of like when your kid gets in trouble. Like if I don't like yelling at my son, but if he's misbehaving, sometimes I will, yes, raise my voice at him. I don't feel good about it. I don't later laugh and go, ha ha, you should have seen the look in his eyes. He was totally scared of me. Like, no, I would rightfully be looked at like a monster for talking like that. But if I later come back and say, yeah, man, I had to yell at my son the other day. He was just, he was not being cooperative and being a little bit snippy and talking back. And so I had to yell at him. And man, I did it because I had to, but I didn't like it. Like, that would make more sense because then you would be like, okay, he's not a psychopath. He recognizes that he doesn't want to have a negative interaction with his child, but sometimes it has to happen in order to get that child in the right direction, in order to keep them, because he's 6, he's learning the rules, he's learning about his place in society and the world around him, right? And so he's going to get things wrong. And I should not be taking joy in punishing him in any way. Whether I take a toy away, doesn't matter whether you take their toy away, whether you yell at them, whether you're spanking, if that's your thing, whatever. You shouldn't take joy in it. And likewise, we shouldn't take joy in reprimanding adults. I don't even take joy. Like if there was like a serial killer, killed like 50 people, and they caught him, and then let's say they sent him to the death penalty, right? They executed him. At no time would I enjoy that. I would just be like, it has to happen, I guess. That's all I would say. Be like, look, there are consequences for your actions. Or like, let's put it in a little bit different context. Let's say somebody breaks into my house and they threaten my family, and then I shoot him. I'm not going to walk around and be strutting and be like, yeah, I killed somebody. Why? Because I didn't want to have to. I was forced to, right? I didn't want to have to. So I'm not going to celebrate it. I'm just going to be like, it's unfortunate that it came to that, but it did. And at the end of the day, I am protecting my family. That's it. I mean, look, I did that episode on men crying and all that, right? And there's all these influencers out there and they're like, men shouldn't cry. You shouldn't cry at your wedding. Blah, you should be a man. And they use one word all the time. They're like, you should be more stoic. Okay. How about we be stoic when we have to punish other people? How about stoic then? You're worried about people not. Dudes will get on there and bitch about men crying at their wedding, like hopefully a once in a lifetime event, crying at their wedding because their beautiful bride is walking down the aisle and they're just overcome with emotion that, of all these things, like I got this new wife. Look how beautiful she is in front of all these people. We're going to take our vows together, this whole thing. And like, oh, don't you dare cry. You be stoic then. But, oh, you want to laugh at somebody else's misfortune? Yeah, go ahead. That's cool. Yeah, just take a laugh. You know what? Wear a hat while you're at it that says, ha ha, you lose. Really? Maybe the time to be stoic is when we're, you know, basically rebuking somebody and say, look, I don't want to do this, but these are the rules. I need you to I need you to act this way or not act this way. And then have a little stoicism there. But it really disturbs me when I see these videos of, being excited. I would not be excited to get a hat or a shirt from what looks like a prison to me or an internment camp. You call it what you want, but it doesn't look like a fun place. I get merch from like Disneyland where you actually have fun, right? That's the whole point of it. You're taking home a memory of something that's fun. And you're like, yeah, I got this hat when I was at Disneyland. And man, that was such a great day. We went on all these roller coaster rides and this happened and this happened. And it was so exciting. And I got sunburn on my neck, but I wasn't too worried about it. Whatever, right? Like the whole point of merchandise is, in that particular context is to remember things. And so you want to remember how you sent people home who wanted to be here. And some of them, their only crime was literally legislative. I'm sorry, administrative paperwork. They didn't get permission, and you're going to celebrate that? No, that's unacceptable. That should not be considered American. That should not be considered making America great. So I have big objections to that. Benny Johnson, he should be embarrassed by that he did that video. I don't care if you support it or not. You can at least say, hey, we support deportation of all these people, but we're not going to celebrate it because there's nothing to celebrate sending somebody back to this, poor situation that they tried to escape. There's nothing funny about that. There's nothing amusing. There's nothing to smile about. Sometimes, yes, you enforce the rules and they're unpleasant. Don't take joy in it. All right, let's get to some comments here. And then we'll head on out, guys. So let's see. Get my little music going on here. See what you guys are saying. If you guys are skewering me like, DL, you're not a libertarian now because those are bad opinions. Time Surfer Canyon says, I was a tanker and a lineman. Am I overqualified? I mean, not to be a tanker and a lineman, but maybe underqualified to be a judge, just based on those. I mean, maybe you're a very intelligent person that has read lots of law and maybe you could demonstrate, comprehension and understanding of it. In that particular context, I would be more willing, but let's see. Mandates have no place in America. I agree. And I've talked about this before. People say, oh, the president has a mandate. Oh, city council has a mandate. And then they're like, in our case here in Jacksonville, they're like, city council has a mandate because they were voted, and Donald Trump has a mandate. I'm like, well, the mayor would have a mandate too, right? Because she won, and she actually won by a higher margin than the president did on the popular vote. And wouldn't a mandate kind of follow the popular? Like a mandate really shouldn't follow the electoral vote. We should think in terms of what's your mandate based on the popular vote. So if you win the election 75% of the popular vote, well, then I would think you have a stronger mandate than if you won it like at, just, a fraction of a percent more than your opponent. I would think that would give you more of a mandate. There's never a 100% mandate because what's the likelihood that somebody receives 100% of the vote and would have received 100% of everybody that didn't vote? Like 0%. I mean, I guess technically there's probably some universe somewhere where that's happened, but it ain't this one. Let's see what else. Damn it, DL. Trump won the votes of nearly 40% of we the people. He has a mandate to use government force to force his will on us. That's a good point. And by the way, when he says 40%, he's talking about 40%, just not Joe Hanush. When he says 40%, he's talking about 40% of all of the people, because you have to count. Like a lot of people didn't vote for one reason or another. So, And so those people are still under authority, so they count. But he did win like 49.8% or something like that of those who voted for him. Let's see here. Why is DL torching us with this babble? Just because he suffered through it doesn't mean we have to. Well, I mean, how will you know if your government is doing anything good? I mean, we can safely say they're probably not doing anything good, but how are you going to know if they do something good? How are you going to know if I'm lying to you? I got to show you this stuff. I got to bring the receipts so that you know that I know what I'm talking about. So there's that. Let's see here. Big, beautiful detention center. That's basically what it is. I mean, I'll give them credit though. They put it up quickly, and for what they're doing, doesn't seem like a bad. And the location, I hate all the excitement around like, oh, there's alligators and snakes everywhere. You'll never get out. Like, okay, you can say that, but we are talking about a lot of people that traveled multiple countries to get here. Like there's that one, like isn't it like a dangerous forest or something like that in between here and one of those countries? I can't remember the name of the forest, but there's like a location where it's extremely dangerous. And a lot of immigrants came through that. It's called, I'm drawing a blank on it. I'll remember it after the show probably. Okay, gas chambers will be installed next week. I think it's a little unfair to compare it to Auschwitz, which a lot of people have. I've seen political cartoons. I think you're better off comparing it to internment camps. I think that would be a better, because one, you are dealing with immigrants in both of them, right? And then there's this like distrust of immigrants, and the setups were temporary. And then we actually didn't kill people intentionally from the internment camps, whereas they did in Alcatraz. And that was, at least from the upper leadership, that was at least their intention all along. So let's see here. Men crying at their wedding. Is that toxic masculinity? You guys probably know this already. I don't even believe in toxic masculinity. I just believe in toxic behaviors. But yeah, I think criticizing men for doing that is toxic masculinity. If you believe in such a thing, I would just say it's toxic behavior and knock it off. But so there's that. Let's see. Duval Mayer has a woman date. We can always count on somebody in the comments to be politically correct. Oops. All right, folks, that's my show for today. I'm going to head on out of here. Thank you for joining me. I will see you tomorrow I got to figure out something. We're going to do something fun, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.